Today, we're launching part 2 of our series on who you are when no one's looking. This week's focus is all on integrity. I'm particularly really interested in this topic. It's going to be great. Last week, we had Honour, which was a really interesting message by Mark Pomeroy. So if you haven't heard that, go back and watch it.
Well, hey there to our Elevate Online family from wherever you are joining us. It's great to have you with us, and especially those of you, as Kelly already mentioned, those of you joining us for the first time. Fantastic to have you with us on this journey as well. And this is actually week 2 of a series we launched last week called Who You Are When No One's Looking. And this series is all about character. And it's such a vital topic because the reality is that many of us have talents and gifts and abilities that will, if we apply them, take us to new and higher levels. But it's only character that'll keep us there. And conversely, as we go to these higher levels, a lack of character will actually ultimately cause our demise in our marriage, in business, finances, career, any sphere of life where we demonstrate a consistent lack of character ultimately erodes and causes the demise of our lives in that area. I remember the first time I ever traveled to Denver, Colorado. Now, Denver is affectionately known as the Mile High City for the very reason that it's a mile above sea level, 1,600 meters above sea level. Now, I live at sea level, and so I traveled there, and first morning after I arrived, I wanted to go for a run. I was staying just nearby the river that runs alongside the city, and so I stepped out of my hotel and started down along the path alongside the river, and after about 100 meters, now I was in reasonable shape. After about 100 meters, I literally had to stop because I was out of breath. My body was not conditioned to operate at that altitude, and so I'm sucking in the smaller density of oxygen that you find a mile above sea level. Locals are just banging past me, vroom, 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 running, cycling, and it was very, very challenging. And but the reality is that the locals who were doing this with ease, running and moving in this mile-high altitude, it's not that they had any special gifts or talents that allowed them to do that. It's actually that they had developed that ability. And I was there for about a week, I found towards the end of the week that I'd already started to acclimate and develop the ability to run at that higher altitude. The good news is the same principle applies to character, that character is not actually the same as talents, and I spoke briefly about that last week. Character, thankfully, is something that we all can develop, and that if we develop it, it'll actually propel us to higher altitudes and allow us to remain at those higher altitudes. Now, a little flashback. Last week, I talked about honor in a cancel culture. And look, here's a little bit of feedback that I received during the week. Listen to this. This is great stuff, they said. Like game-changing important stuff, bring it on. And that's incredibly encouraging to know that people's lives and mindsets are being changed by what we're teaching here. And you don't have to have FOMO. You can go back and either watch that on YouTube, or you can jump into any of your favorite podcast platforms. Just search Elevate Church Perth and you'll find us and you'll be able to catch up with that message. A little bit of a bonus thing, if you want to take a deeper dive in this series as well, is that there is a Bible reading plan in the Bible app called True Virtue. So if you search in the plans in the Bible app, search for True Virtue, you'll find a plan that actually parallels this series, Who You Are When No One's Looking. So I encourage you to do that as well. Today I want to talk about integrity, a matter of integrity. So speaking about the Bible app, if you've got that handy, how about you pop that open to Psalm 15. And I'm going to be reading from the Message version, Psalm 15. And this is something that David wrote. It was like a rhetorical conversation that he had with God, sort of like a pondering, thinking out loud, prayerfully considering a perspective. And let me tee off from verse 1. David wrote, God, who gets invited to dinner at your place? That's a great question. How do we get on your guest list? And then he gave the answer. Walk straight, act right, tell the truth. Don't hurt your friend, don't blame your neighbor, despise the despicable, keep your word even when it costs you, make an honest living, never take a bribe. You'll never get blacklisted if you live like this. Back in October 2019, there was a story that made the rounds about a gentleman who had, on a Sunday morning, he'd lost his wallet, and inside that wallet was a considerable amount of notes. This is actually the wallet in question. Considerable amount of cash. And he lost it, didn't recall losing it or where he lost it, and he reported that to the police that the wallet was lost. And just a few hours later, that very same wallet was handed into that police station with every single dollar accounted for inside that wallet. And that's why the story made the news. That not just that a wallet had been returned, but that somebody returned it without actually keeping any of the money, the cash, for themselves, which if they had, there would have been no way of tracing it. And so I read a story like that, and of course, maybe like you, I'm encouraged to know that people like that still exist. But I'm also a little bit disturbed that this story made the news, because it points to the reality that we live in a culture where integrity is on the slide downwards as a character quality. And a story like this pops its head up because it's like, whoa, no one would have expected that. It's kind of a love-hate commentary on the culture that we're living in. So let's take a bit of a dive into this topic of integrity. And I want to start with just highlighting what integrity is not. And most importantly, integrity is not perfection, that you never do anything wrong, or that if somebody does something wrong, well, they're obviously not a person of integrity. I mean, if integrity was perfection, then the only person in history that could have been described as having lived with integrity was Jesus. And so integrity is not perfection. But I do wonder if when you hear the word integrity, what that conjures up as far as a definition. And I think maybe many of us would gravitate towards honesty and trustworthiness, a bit like the guy that handed in the wallet with the cash. And it definitely includes those things, honesty and trustworthiness. And I'll talk a little bit about those today. But a more comprehensive definition, let me throw a more comprehensive definition at you. And it's this: integrity is the quality or state of being complete or undivided. Let me say that again, because I realize this may not be a definition that's familiar to all of us. The quality or state of being complete or undivided. It speaks to a consistency of who we are and what we do across all spheres of life. In fact, let me break that down for you a little bit. It speaks to a consistency around what we say and what is actually the truth, that there's not multiple versions of the truth, that there's no such thing as alternate facts, that we are committed to telling the truth. We are committed to telling the truth and not exaggerating, because exaggerating is a ploy that people use to try and strengthen what is ultimately a reasonably weak position. It's a form of lying. It's not the truth. Gaslighting is an example of this. And those sorts of practices, lying, exaggerating, gaslighting, they actually point to a lack of integrity. that there's not a consistency between what we're saying and what is actually the truth. Integrity speaks to a consistency between our internal beliefs and our external actions. That we're not somebody who professes to believe a certain thing and yet very rarely acts in accordance with our professed beliefs. And then it also speaks to a consistency across all spheres, that we're not different in different settings, that we're not one sort of person in our workplace, a different sort of person in our home life, a different sort of person in church world, a different sort of person in our social life, a different sort of person in our private life where no one's watching, but rather we have a consistency that there's only one version of ourselves. Remember about 3 years ago, we had some people join Elevate, and they'd come from a different church setting. And we invited them into our Elevate group, which we hosted in our home. And one of them, he came to me in my lounge room, when he first walked in, and he said to me, kind of just matter-of-factly, thanks for inviting us into your home. I didn't expect this. Obviously you have like two versions of yourself. You have like the Sunday version and the home version. And I was like, huh? What? No, what? No. I said, no, I don't have, there's only one version of me. I don't have the energy to try and manage multiple versions. And I said, look, you'll just have to, over time, find out for yourself whether that's true or not. But here's some incentive to having this consistency about who you are across these spheres. Something that Solomon wrote. He said that honesty lives confident and carefree, but shifty is sure to be exposed. People that live with integrity don't find themselves lying awake at night, hoping nobody's going to find out. The opposite of integrity isn't dishonesty, although dishonesty reflects a lack of integrity. But the opposite of integrity is actually hypocrisy. And you don't have to be around church world for too long before you hear this word hypocrisy, but it actually tends to come from people outside of the church looking at the church and labeling us a bunch of hypocrites. And the reason we cop that sort of criticism is that there is a perception in certain spheres of our culture that Christians are notorious for expecting perfection from other people outside of the church whilst failing to live up to those standards themselves. And hey, if that's true of any of us, individually or corporately, then hey, that criticism is very much justified. But actually, that's not what hypocrisy is, and that's not where the word comes from. In fact, the word actually speaks to having two versions of yourself. And it comes from the ancient, classical Greek plays where the performers would wear a mask. This is an example that was found in an archaeological site. This is sort of a mask. And the word hypocrite literally translates an actor. It literally means there's two versions. There's the version that everyone sees, and then there's the version that actually is the other version, the version that appears when no one's looking. And that person in that setting is labeled a hypocrite, an actor, two versions of the same person. And Jesus, he dunked heavy on this when the religious leaders had built a reputation for themselves of being hypocrites. And here's an example of Jesus dunking on them. You're hopeless, you religion scholars and Pharisees, frauds. You buff the surface of your cups and bowls so they sparkle in the sun, pointing to the looking shiny and perfect on the outside, while the insides are maggoty with your greed and gluttony. Stupid Pharisee. Scour the insides and then the gleaming surface will mean something. In other words, don't have two versions of yourself. Bring them together. Make sure there's one, the inside and the outside. Make sure there's consistency between you on the inside, who you are when no one's looking, and who you are when people are looking. In church speak, there's a phrase, it's been around for many, many, many years, called Sunday best. You know, make sure you are wearing your Sunday best. And it spoke to, you know, getting kind of glammed up to come to church on a Sunday, potentially and typically. And look, if that's what you want to do, I don't want to yuck your yum, get glammed up, fantastic. But I really do have two problems with just giving this kind of accreditation to as bringing your Sunday best to how people look when they roll in. And that's, number one, you can look $1 million, look like you've brought your Sunday best, but have a terrible attitude. And therefore, you are a hypocrite in that particular dynamic. And the other thing I have a problem with is that why just bring your best on a Sunday? Let's be people, again, this consistency, let's be people who always bring our best. As Elevate Church, our code is that we will always bring our best. Not perfection, but always, in every setting, we will always bring our best words, our best attitudes, our best energy, our best expectation, our best faith, our best encouragement. We'll always bring our best and bring a consistency in everything that we do. I heard a story about a guy who was like a leading foreman in a building company, and he'd been in that role for 40 years. And he was nearing the end of his time with the company, and he'd been telegraphing with the owner of the company, about when he was planning on retiring. He didn't want to surprise them with the date and the announcement, gave them plenty of lead time. And he had about 1 month to go before his scheduled retirement date, and the owner asked him if he could please supervise the building of one more house. And he said, no, there is no way. I'm out of here in a month, and of course there's no way I'm going to be able to get a house built in a month, so no, find someone else. The owner was pretty persuasive and eventually convinced him to stick around and just build one more home. And look, his heart wasn't in it. He wanted to get it done as quickly as possible, so he just started cutting corners. He would get in construction workers that was substandard. They do the job quickly, but not necessarily to a high quality, not to the quality that he had been executing for the previous 40 years. He was using substandard materials. I mean, he was smart enough to make sure that none of these defects and imperfections and poorer quality things were visible on the outside, but he knew that they existed. Eventually, the project wound up. He'd finished this house, and the owner came to him and dangled a set of keys in front of him and said, "Hey, we're so grateful for the contribution you've made to our company over the last 40 years. We wanted to honor you. Here's the keys to this house. We want to give you this house as a gift on your retirement." And that story is very much a metaphor for life, that we are building our own lives. And every time we cut corners, every time what we say doesn't line up with the truth, every time who we are on the inside doesn't match up with what we're doing or projecting on the outside, every time that we're different in different settings and we compromise this and we're actually compromising and eroding our life. And not only that, a lack of integrity almost always affects other people, the people around us as well. The lack of integrity in your marriage, well, that obviously impacts your spouse. A lack of integrity with your finances will ultimately affect the generations to follow. A lack of integrity in your parenting, say you believe one thing but not demonstrating and modeling those values to your kids, it ultimately is going to negatively impact them. It's also a leadership issue. If you and we demonstrate a lack of integrity in leadership, it's going to actually negatively impact the people that we're leading. Last week, talking with one of our team members, and they'd stepped into a new job, and it was kind of a dream job for them. And they were excited, and actually it had required them to actually move a significant distance to start this job. And so they went all in on this job, but within a very short period of time, the boss that they had in this job just became untenable. And so in a reasonably short period of time, they left the job and they moved back to Perth. And we were talking about that, and just last week, and just saying, well, why? Like, what was it that was so untenable? And they said to me, well, the boss that I had was just inconsistent from one situation to the next, inconsistent from one decision to the next, inconsistent with their emotions and attitudes from one minute to the next. And it just had me constantly on eggshells. And so I had to just pull the pin and get out of there. And I can tell you, this person that I was talking with, they are phenomenal. And so that company that they had stepped into and then withdrew from have forfeited the opportunity to have this incredibly high quality individual working for them simply because of a lack of integrity, a lack of consistency. Again, not perfection, but consistency from the person that was leading them. So I know this is challenging, and look, this whole series is going to be challenging, and that's okay. Sometimes God wants to shake our tree because he wants to reestablish things, and he wants to place us in a direction and build a platform that's better. So I want to invite you to pray a prayer. And this is going back to David. We already read something that this like rhetorical conversation he had, Psalm 15 with God. Psalm 139, he prays a prayer to God. And it's a pretty vulnerable prayer. In fact, we've taught on this, and I've said when I taught on this, we did a series called Dangerous Prayers, that this is a dangerous prayer because it just you're laying yourself wide open. But you're laying yourself wide open to God, and God will be very, very careful with how he responds to your vulnerability. So here's the prayer. Investigate my life, O God. Find out everything about me. Cross-examine and test me. Get a clear picture of what I'm about. See for yourself whether I've done anything wrong. Then guide me on the road to eternal life. Hey, maybe that's the prayer for you today as we've drilled into this topic of integrity. Next week, I'm going to talk about and teach on perseverance, what to do when you feel like giving up. So come back for that. Bring a friend. We'd love to continue this journey with you in this series, Who You Are When No One's Looking.